I show 7 o'clock. I will call this meeting to order. I will start with roll call. Larry?
Here.
Jane?
Here.
Mary?
Here.
Ashley? Here. Jeannie?
Here.
Dylan?
Here.
Natalie? And our friend Bren is gone tonight. Was the meeting properly noticed?
The meeting was properly noticed.
Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. We will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I promise it was there, Larry.
What's that?
I don't think you can see it. All right, we're going to start tonight with our Student Board Representative Report.
All right, so, we're gonna need the remote. We've got the November report, so first we wanted to talk about our Future Ready Days that we did a couple weeks ago. So for the first day, it was grade-specific post-secondary prep, so freshmen and sophomores took the pre-ACT to prepare them for the ACT in their junior year. Juniors could choose to either do the practice ACT or the PSAT, which qualifies you for national merit status. And then the seniors had a choice between college application time, scholarship work time, or the ASVAB test, so like a military competency test. And then the second day, there were some career speakers that volunteered their time to come in and kind of talk about their jobs and their lives. So every student got to see 4 speakers and kind of learn about how that happened, including Mr. Larry Dukes over there. Thank you, Larry.
All right, so our second notable item we wanted to discuss was the PLE Fall Night Hike that happens. So this included some classroom pumpkin carving and painting. There was a collaboration with our Serving Others Insight to help prep those pumpkins. I'm part of Serving Others, so we were there cleaning out pumpkins, bringing them in, things like that. And then they were decorated and carved by PLE classrooms and teachers. They were displayed around the campus on October 19th, and families and students came to hike and view all the beautiful projects that were out there. And then Serving Others also delivered those pumpkins to the downtown businesses on for October 28th, the business trick-or-treat weekend. So the pumpkins look great. Like, I went down there, and they were all displayed either inside or outside the businesses. So it was just really fun to see all the creative projects that the kids were able to come up with.
Yeah. Third, we wanted to just talk about our athletics and activities. So we had a couple teams go to state, including our girls volleyball team and boys and girls cross country. Girls volleyball, it was a tough loss. We had a 37-12 regular season record, so really a great season. But a hard-fought 5-set thriller versus McFarland just didn't go our way by literally 2 points. And then we had the FCCLA shoe drive to provide shoes for people who need them. And then Hope Squad got a lot of new members, plus QPR training, which is like suicide prevention training for these students.
And lastly, we just wanted to highlight some salutes and recognitions. So first off, we just wanted to salute Mrs. Perney, the PLE administration, and Serving Others Insight for their help with that PLE Fall Night Hike. And then we also wanted to touch on the fact that Horizon Elementary was ranked number 22 out of all the elementary schools in the state, so that's a huge accomplishment. We also have a huge shout out to Mrs. Molini and Mrs. Davison, the advisors of Hope Squad, who provided that QPR training for students. They always do a wonderful job, and they're really just passionate about what they do, so huge shout out to them. And then a shout out to Tommy Jonas and the volleyball team for a great season and qualifying for state again. And then October was also Principal Appreciation Month, so a huge shout out to all the principals in the district. Thank you for all that you do, and we notice all that you do, and we really appreciate it. That about wraps up everything. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Anyone?
All right, thank you.
I
Nice
just
job.
just have one quick one, and just maybe anybody else in the room can answer it too. There's the abbreviation in there for the QPR training. Do you know what that stands for?
So QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer, and it is a student-to-student training method to help students respond to a student in need who is either struggling with suicidal ideation, and if you're concerned about a student, it's just a way to prepare. You're not acting as a therapist, you're more acting as a correspondent, and that training really gives you a good idea of how to help the student best when they need it.
What was the letters again?
QPR,
Right, but
question, persuade, refer.
question, persuade, refer.
Yes.
Thank you.
And if you have any other further questions, Mrs. Davison she knows her stuff, and Mrs. Molini. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to either of them, and they'd be happy to answer those.
And the key part of that, it's really student-to-student
Yes.
awareness and knowledge of it.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's peer-to-peer kind of thing that's there. So it's a good thing from that standpoint.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
All right, thank you. Nice work. Okay, do we have any comments from citizens? No? Okay. All right, moving on to our consent agenda. We had our minutes from our previous meetings. The policy committee and the regular board meeting on the 23rd. Some correspondence was in our package, and then we have the gift from Doug LaPlante for $2,000 donated to PHS Wrestling. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor of accepting the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? All right, consent agenda is passed. Thank you. Moving on to business affairs.
So Business Affairs met tonight, and we had a presentation from Chef Clayton on the food service update and report. One of the interesting items he has coming up is called Global Eats in the high school. So I'll be interested to hear more about that. And then we reviewed the financial report and associated check registers for the month. The revenues are at 3.75% received, and expenses are at 24.6 made. So I would take a motion to accept the report from the Business Affairs Committee.
Move to approve the Business Affairs Committee report as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the Business Affairs Committee report, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, moving on to the new course proposal revisions.
I did not receive any questions.
Good, okay, all right. So therefore, we can move on to the motion to approve. Do I have a motion?
Yep. Move to approve the new course proposal revisions for art, physical education and health, and yearbook publications as presented.
Second.
All in favor of the motion to approve as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oppose.
All right. Motion passes 5-1. Moving on to our community survey results.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is, we have two representatives from the Donovan Group, and I'd like to introduce Joe Donovan, who's here with us tonight, who will introduce his colleague, who will take us through the results.
Good evening. Thank you for that introduction. And good evening, board members. You'll recall that I was here a few weeks ago at this point. Again, my name is Joe Donovan from the Donovan Group. We talked through the process and questions for a community survey, and we are back with the results of that survey. And so I am joined tonight by my colleague, Perry Hibner, who is in beautiful Florida. Thankfully, we can't hear the ocean breeze. He was telling me that it was pretty nice where he is, so he's going to save us from that. But at any rate, I'm going to turn things over to Perry, and he is going to walk through the survey results and take questions, and I'll facilitate as needed. So with that, Perry, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I just want to get a nod of heads or thumbs up. Can everybody hear me just fine?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, Joe, you can leave it on this slide for right now. Good evening. It's great to be with you again tonight, albeit virtually. For anyone who is new to here, my name is Perry Hibner, and I am the lead survey strategist for the Donovan Group. I'm excited to share the results and analysis from the Community Facilities Survey we administered to community members on behalf of the Pewaukee School District. Before we get into the slides, I wanted to provide a little background information. Over the past 2 years, we have worked with approximately 45 districts in the Midwest administering surveys, including a similar survey for the Pewaukee School District in March of 2018. Joel, if you want to go ahead and move ahead, then I'll start talking about the next slide. Thank you, I can see it there. We are often asked about scientific versus convenience sample, with some people wondering if a convenience sample provides valid results. With any survey, the higher the participation, the more accurate the results will be. A good completion rate for surveys is typically around 10 to 20%, and I'll talk more about participation rates in a bit. What I can tell you is the data in the report and what we will cover is very good. Superintendent Katie and I have been in correspondence many times over the past 6 to 8 weeks. Our firm has also had the opportunity to participate in 3 recent facility core team meetings to talk about the survey, and board members will recall we presented to you ahead of the survey window last month. One other reminders, we are supporters of public education and certainly are happy when the results from a survey are positive. However, our number one goal is that the results are accurate. We would also like to stress that a survey is a snapshot in time. The only guarantee is that the results today would look different a month from now due to variables, some a district can control and a great many that a district cannot. Joe, if you want to go ahead and move ahead to the next slide. Okay. You will see we kept the survey open for a little more than 2 weeks. It isn't included in the report, but about 77% of those who jumped into the survey completed it, which is a very solid completion rate. We have 1,030 people who completed the survey. That is down about 14% from 2018. Although we have noticed since the pandemic that participation in community surveys in particular is lower. That also works out to about 10% of those who voted in the April 2022 election in Pewaukee, and more than 15% of those who. So when we talk about being in that 10 to 20% range, based on those people who voted, we're within that range, which is good. Of those who took the survey, 199 were placed in what we call a comparison group, which represents about 19% of the total number of participants, and I'll talk more about them in the next slide. So go ahead, Joe. Some of the questions or statements will include 2 groupings, all respondents and the comparison group. Starting with slide number 15, question number 15, statement number 15, there will be 3 groupings, all respondents, the comparison group, and a weighted group. I mentioned this the last time at the school board meeting I presented at, but I compared the 3 sets of data to the porridge in the 3 bears. Most community surveys include a vast majority of completed surveys from district staff and families. So all responses can be skewed, or for the analogy, it's too hot or too favorable. On the other hand, because the comparison group is made up of individuals who don't have a direct relationship with the district, those results can be too cold or too unfavorable to continue the analogy. So we now include a weighted group. We don't say that surveys are predictive. Again, they are a snapshot in time. A lot can change between now and an election, good or bad. But as I noted when I presented in October, we have found that our weighted results in other community surveys have been within a couple of percentage points of the election result, provided what was asked was similar or identical to what was presented on the survey. All right, Joe, next slide. So you can see here, more than 92% of all respondents and nearly 78% of the comparison group are satisfied with the district. These numbers are astounding and significantly higher, and I don't use many adjectives when I do reports, than what we are seeing with other Midwestern districts over the past couple of years. It is important to note that more than 12% of the comparison group had no opinion. This also isn't surprising because they have less of a connection with the district. I would suggest that additional engagement efforts over the next year would be one way to raise the percentage of those who strongly agree or agree with this statement in the comparison group. Next slide, Joe. You can see more than 77% of all respondents and nearly 81% of the comparison group indicated that they were well informed or had some familiarity with the identified facility needs. But with 19.1 to 22.62%, depending on the group, having no familiarity with the process, there appears to be ample opportunity for the district to continue to engage stakeholders in the coming months, as those people might become people who are informed and understand the needs, which then makes them more likely to be supportive of any solutions. Next slide, Joe. So, starting with here, I'll note that in most cases, the percentage of respondents who strongly agree or agree with addressing facility needs tends to be higher than the support for specific solutions and after a referendum date is announced. So what I'm saying is this statement often sets the ceiling for support for specific solutions. So notably, nearly 80% of all respondents and more than 65% of the comparison group strongly agree or agree that the district's facility needs must be addressed now. You will notice that more than 72% of the weighted group strongly agreed or agreed with this statement. What this means, it bodes well for the district if the right option and tax impact are determined. Next slide, please. Nearly 87, we decided to add the next two slides to kind of address certain parts of things that are being considered. Nearly 87% of all respondents would vote yes on a referendum question to address CTE facility needs at Pewaukee High School, while nearly 70% of the comparison group strongly agreed or agreed with this statement, and more than 74% of the weighted group would support such an option. What that tells us is that CTE needs, curriculum needs, are supported by the vast majority of your communities. Next slide, Joe. While there are significant support for a referendum question to address multi-use facility upgrades at Pewaukee High School, it was less than support for CTE spaces. So you can see nearly 76% of all respondents strongly agree or agree with that statement, while the number drops to 47% in the comparison group, and it is 56.49% with the weighted group. Again, solid numbers, but not nearly what we saw for CTE. Then we'll move on to the three questions that dealt with dollar amounts. So, more than 82% of all respondents would support a $24 million capital referendum question. If you haven't seen the survey, when we included that, we included the tax impact as well. So we're aware of not just the dollar amount, but the tax impact. That number dropped to just under 65% of the comparison group. And when we weight those two groups, it works out to about 69%. Next slide, Joe. So then we asked people about a $42 million capital referendum question. And again, we included the tax impact for $100,000 of equalized property value. And more than 71% of all respondents would support a $42 million capital question. Again, I would remind everybody that's the hot porridge. The cold porridge is the comparison group, and that number drops to 44%, while the weighted group was at just under 53%. And then finally, if things that have been talked about in the core team meetings, we asked about a $48 million referendum question, which would include all parts. And nearly 66% of all respondents would support that question. That number drops to more than 36% of the comparison group, with the weighted group at just under 46%. Now, there were other questions on the survey, but those were the highlights. I did not want to have this be a 35 or 40-minute presentation. I believe Superintendent Katie has shared the entire presentation with the board. Again, I'm happy to take questions about the presentation or the report or anything else you might have. I want to, first of all, thank you for your time. I appreciate you having me last month, and I'm sorry that I can't be there tonight.
Thank you, Perry. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Perry. Any questions?
I have a few questions. Does anybody want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Clarifying, you broke away, you broke out, or vanished when you were describing the voting comparison, I guess in 2018, to these results. But first, let me just make sure I'm following what you're saying here relative to the numbers. 1,030 responded?
This time, yes. Is that Mary who's talking?
I'm
everybody?
sorry, yes. Just
Okay,
assume you
okay.
can see
That's
everywhere.
okay. I can't see it for one thing, so I can't.
I
finish talking, but
apologize.
I thought
It's
I
Mary.
recognized the voice. So 1,030 this time, Mary. Last time we had about 1,170, so that works out to about 14% less
Okay.
than the March 2018
Okay,
survey.
okay, so the 1,030. So all of the numbers, I'm just going to take an easy median here and do 70%. So if I'm doing 70% as favorable, 70% of 1,030, I'm ballparking that at 700. Is that still, we're still following that?
I am
700
following
people?
you, yes.
Okay.
When,
All
any
right.
numbers that say all responses are all responses of the 1,030.
Right, and I'm just taking the high numbers. I understand that a little, some of them are in 80 and.
Yep.
Okay, so then, the last thing I wanted to make sure I understood, our district staffing is roughly around 500?
About 455.
450, good, that's, all right. So 700, and I take away the 455, we're looking at 200, north of 200, as a survey sample outside of the district personnel, and our district size is 1,600, 16,000?
You're looking
How
at-
many, how many did we mail out? Let's do
We
that.
mail, a postcard went to every household in,
I understand that, how many?
do you know what the number is, John? I don't know what the number is. It's every resident.
But Mary, only the teachers that reside in the district would have gotten the postcard.
So I'm going to use the number 16,000, which is in my head. Well, we can take off more than that. I'm happy to do that. So we've got the 800 as being favorable. And let's take out 200 then, and that's from the district. So I'm down to 600 people favorable in a district of 16,000. Is that, have I?
We're not 16,000.
Yeah, and the only 4.4% of the responses were people employed by the district, just to clarify that. In the 16,000, you're saying, Mary, is residents? I'm not sure, I'm not following.
Right, the district electors, the people who would be
Oh,
voting.
the number of people that voted.
Yeah, yeah.
And we provided voting totals going back 5 years, and they range from a high of just over 10,000 people who voted in elections to a low of about 4,700 people who vote in elections.
But I thought we sent it to everybody.
We did. I'm just
Okay.
telling you, because I don't know what exactly that number is, but I do have the number of how many people voted.
Right, okay, and if it's 50% of the, well, okay. So I'm still sitting at a very small number of district electors not affiliated with the district who are in favor of this, less than 500. And out of 16,000, would I be following your numbers correctly?
So if I can weigh in, everyone. So at 4.4% of 1,030, that works out to about approximately 56 people. So of the 1,030 who completed the survey, about 56 were staff members. So the remaining 974 were not staff members, but other community members. Okay? So again, I would love to get 10,000 people who live in the community to complete a survey. We've never had a district where that's happened regardless of their size. I mean, in Middleton, where we did our most recent survey, and Mike knows I talk about this a lot because that's where I live. We had 1,800 people who completed the survey, and we had more than 20,000 people who voted in the election. So again, you're talking about a convenient sample and trying to extrapolate information from there. But again, Mary, I just want to be clear. It is the majority of people who took the survey are not people who are district staff. They are adults who have children in your schools.
I was just going to clarify that. Thank you. Then that's what I meant. Connected to the district in some way. I didn't mean to narrow it down so much to just being employed
Okay.
here. but they are very much connected to the district.
Which
Which,
is
so-
why, Mary, and I don't want to cut you off at all. I
No,
certainly want to
feel
answer
free.
any question. But that's why we do that weighted group, because you heard me say this at the last meeting. 70% of eligible voters in pretty much any community are people who are not affiliated with the school district. They don't work for the district. They don't have kids who go to the district. And so that's why it's important with the comparison group that you give that group a lot more weight to be able to get a better understanding of what these results truly mean for the community.
Got it, thank you very much, got it. And actually, I see that I did do that. I did say, what's the district employment? So I apologize for that. But now you're telling me, thank you for this, Mike, or Perry?
Harry.
Perry, thank you, Perry. That of the 460, 4% came from that pool. 4% of the respondents come from the 460.
Correct, 4.4%.
Okay.
That's all, and if you want to see a breakdown, Mary?
No, that answers my question.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much, Perry.
Thank you, Mary. I think I saw other hands though, too.
Yeah, this is Larry Dukes. I have a question on, it's number 9, and I think it's one of those questions that has a specific reference or name in terms of would you recommend the district to others? Typically in other marketing surveys, it's referred to as a what? Net Promoter Score. Tell us a little bit about that score and maybe explain some of the or the comments that came through. So, why is that important?
So I have to be honest, we don't have many districts who ask us if there's a question, ask us to include a question about recommending the district. But the reality is that, first of all, you don't want people who are apathetic. That's even worse than people who are upset with the district. You want people to have opinions about the district. And so the reality is when we ask questions, whether they're satisfaction, whether we ask people to give scores of 0 through 10, which we often do, whether we ask in this case, whether you would recommend the district, strong districts are going to get high satisfaction levels. They're going to get high numbers of people who say, yes, I recommend the district. And here's the reality in the case for the district here when you're looking to do something, potential referendum question. If you don't have people who are satisfied in your district, I don't care if you're asking for $1. I don't care if you think you've got the best solution out there. If people aren't satisfied with your district, they're not going to agree with any of your solutions. So it's sort of a stepping stone, if you will, for moving forward. The fact that you have community members, not just your families, but community members who feel the quality work you're doing, the quality work your staff is doing, the quality work kids do in that district, that bodes well for your district, regardless of doing a referendum or not, because it means the community puts a lot of trust in you and supports what you're doing. Does that answer your question, Larry?
Yeah, I think it helps a lot in terms of what's there. But I think when you talked about it, also said that we need to do more community engagement. So this comparison group potentially is a group that we need to do a little bit more work with in terms of telling them about the programs that we have here in Pewaukee and why we feel that at this point in time, we need to continue to invest in our CTE or STEM areas for the community, if you will. I mean, this is where jobs are for the future, right? So.
Well, and Larry, I was a communications director for a long time in Middleton. You hear me complain about districts that want to be transparent about what they're doing. But I think in the long run, it's also good business. You know, it's not just, because the reality is I always told our staff, I told our administrators, I don't want to just engage the community when we're going to referendum. People see through that. I want to engage them all the time.
Correct.
I want them to know what we're doing, because when they know what we're doing, they're more likely to understand why we might need to do something else, or why we might need a little help.
If I could, Perry, just to jump in on that, those scores don't just happen. When we're talking about the good overall positives, again, Perry's talking about strong districts. I'll just add, that is a reflection of ongoing consistent work by the district to raise those scores. We never see, again, those scores are exceptional. Even when we see lesser scores, we can point to years of work toward raising those scores. So again, congratulations on that.
One more question.
Go ahead, yeah.
So are there any red flags in terms of, or red or yellow flags, I guess, if you will, in terms of the results of the survey that would cause us maybe some hesitancy or concern or things that we would need to make sure that we have our community and potential voters more aware of from what you've seen so far?
No, the results are very good. I think you're in really good shape. I think, and I said this to Mike and the team last week, I think for school boards oftentimes, and I say this not just as somebody who's done a lot of these surveys now for the Donovan Group, I say this during my time in Middleton when I led 3 survey efforts, the devil's in the details. So the reality is there's overwhelming support for a $24 million option. The question is, you know, again, I think the discussions you're going to have over tonight and over the next few weeks is the decision about, you know, do we do 24 million where we know we've got a lot of support? Because I would say 42 or 48 million is a coin flip. And then the question I often get asked by districts then, when there's a gap between those two numbers, is there a number somewhere between we can go to? And the answer is yes. And Mike, is it okay if I kind of explain
Sure.
how we do that or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, go ahead, Perry.
Yep. So I will tell you, in Middleton, we were very conservative with our approach. And we always said, we thought of 60% as kind of the barometer we wanted to use to make sure we had that kind of support before we put any option out there. And so looking at Pewaukee, and I'll use 60% as your number as well. If you were to say we want to have at least 60% support, because we can't predict what's going to happen with inflation or other variables over the next few months. And we want to have some wiggle room in case, you know, some of those variables we can't control aren't great. Or let's say the variables stay exactly the same, but we want to get at least a 60% vote because we want the community to believe, you know, to understand that this was supported by the vast majority of the community and that these are needs we really have and that maybe we go to a phased approach or something. I would say that in order to get to 60%, knowing where we're at 24 million and where that number in the weighted group drops at 42 million, you're probably looking at somewhere around $30 to $32 million. And again, what we do is we take the numbers between those two, and we see how much the percentages drop, even though we didn't ask about 26 or 28 or 30. 30 and 32
But
million.
a question on
And
that,
Mike and the core team heard that last week.
yeah, on
Yeah,
the
that's-
response for number, or on the survey, it was like number 19, but it said, okay, more than 71% of all respondents would support a $42 million capital referendum question. And then that number dropped to a little bit more than 44% for the comparison, while the weighted group was just under 53%. I'm kind of interpreting that that's still pretty darn good support based on the survey that we've got, right?
It is, but keep in mind, Larry, that again, that's where I talk about that hot porridge and cold porridge and just right porridge. Sometimes I'm in some meetings with school boards where they want to look at that all respondents and they see the numbers quite high and say, hey, we can get
And you just broke up.
people, a lot of those people who take the survey would tell us that they don't afford that dollar amount. They just happen to take it, and that's why we do the weighted group.
Maybe it'd be helpful, Perry, or Joe, if you guys could talk about what do you typically see as the variability between these kinds of results and what you see on election day?
Yep.
If I could ask a question before you move off of those points, if that's all right?
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. What makes up the comparison group?
So the easiest way for me to explain that, Mary, and Joe, I don't know if you want to move that slide backwards so people can see it, but is that it is people who are not directly affiliated with the district. So it would be people who aren't staff members, aren't students in this case, aren't people who aren't families who have children in the schools currently, or preschool age children, because we can assume that most of those preschool age children are eventually going to go to Pewaukee schools. So we remove all of those, and the people who are left are the comparison group.
What's the size of the comparison group?
199.
What's the size of the weighted group?
So the weighted group isn't everybody. It is effectively just those 5 groups I mentioned. And I want to say the weighted group was in the neighborhood of around 550 to 600. So I would have actually had to, I don't put that in there, but it's not as simple when I do the weighted group as saying, oh, let's give 0.7 weight to the comparison group and 0.3 to the all responses. We still remove some people from the all responses because they don't have a direct affiliation.
Thank you, Perry.
You bet. Sorry if it sounds confusing. I know oftentimes when I say it, it sounds confusing. So anyway. So Mike, I can go ahead and answer that. And if
Sure.
Joe wants to fill in the gaps, I'd be happy to. So what I tell districts is if you do a lot of engagement over the next few months, once you make your decision about what you'd like to put on the ballot, if you decide to put something on the ballot, you can see a 2 to 4% improvement. But again, again, I can't speak for what's going to happen with other variables like inflation, other parts of the economy, those sorts of things. You do a great job, so people know. I mean, the vast majority of people in your community know you're a high-functioning, high-quality school district. But so it's not like you're going to have to persuade people that they know that. But there are still a lot of people who don't, like we talked before, about 19 to 22.5%, who don't know about the facility needs. That the CTE spaces were built in the late 60s and really haven't had much done to them since then. They don't know about why you need a multi-use facility. That's the sort of engagement and informational work that needs to take place over the next few months. Districts that do that see an increase from their survey results. Districts that don't usually see it stay flat or a slight decline.
But again, and I'll jump in on that, just to underline something that Perry said, we don't see 10-point increases. Again, 2 to 4 is a good estimate.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good job.
Yes, thank
Thank
you
you,
for
guys.
your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Need
you.
anything else, Michael, let us know. Thank you.
Yep. So just a couple of comments before we move on to the next piece. So next steps, this is an informational item for you to have this so that you can be thinking about this. If you have questions, whether it be about the data in the survey or anything related, just reach out. I can reach out to Joe and Perry. I can, John can talk about the financial pieces. So if there's questions that you have, we're at your disposal for that. The next formal step is we intend in December to have the team from Epstein Ewan and C.G. Schmidt here, primarily Epstein Ewan, our architectural firm, would be there to present options to you and a recommended solution. And then it's up to the 7 of you in terms of what you want to do. I mean, the January meeting is when you would need to act by the statutory timelines if you wanted to place something on the ballot for April. So we have a meeting in between, right, where we could have some additional discussion if you'd like to in a meeting, before you have, again, Epstein Ewan architects here to walk you through solutions, because we've been working on those solutions, rudimentary design ideas. We just visited a number of schools. We had our core team visit a number of schools on Friday. We're visiting a couple more on Wednesday to look at some spaces related to the projects that we're talking about. So again, if you need any additional information, let us know, or any clarification, please let us know.
Moving on to the district data and assessment report.
Yeah, so Candace Bentley Held is with us tonight to present the report, and her and I are going to tag team commentary and notes on it along the way, as well as we have Becky Cook, who assists Candace in our data and assessment department. Here tonight as well, we have administration from each of the schools in case there's any school-specific questions, and then Robin Wilson and Adriana Plock are here as well in case we have any questions for them on either this portion or the next portion of the agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to Candace, and her and I will kind of tag team it from here.
Sounds great. So I'm here for the annual assessment report on the state assessment data from last year. We'll start off by talking about some of our enrollment information and then move into our forward and pre-CT and ACT data. So, oh god, I clicked it the right way. Overall, our enrollment had been increasing over the past 20 years or so. We did see a slight dip in 2021. We're really coming back up, just still about 50 students under that 2021 number. And so looking forward to next year, we're probably going to be a little higher than 2023, but still 20 under that number. But definitely making progress back up to those pre-COVID numbers. When we look at our racial demographic makeup, we have about 20% of our students that identify as a racial minority. The largest group identifies as Asian students at 6.9%, and then students identifying as 2 or more races comes in at 5.9%. So those would be the two groups that really make up the largest of the 20%. And we have been staying fairly stable over the past 5 years. We saw some really strong increases from 2011 to 2015, but really stable around the 20% of a minority population the last few years. When we look at it in sheer numbers, we can see the same drop-off that impacted our overall numbers for the enrollment data also impacted our overall numbers for students identifying as minorities. So very much expected with a decrease in enrollment, you'll have a decrease in enrollment of other individuals. So coming back up, but nothing unexpected with that decrease in enrollment. When we look at our number of English language learners, we have been decreasing the overall number pretty steadily over the past 3 years. There was a high number in 2020, but steady increases down to 47 students in 2023. That is projected to increase a little bit this year. Economically disadvantaged students, the number for 2023 decreased from 2022. In 2022, we did have that high number of 14.1% of students identifying as economically disadvantaged, and 2023 saw it dip to 12.1. We can see that in that same exchange, the state increased, and then Ospiang and county stayed about the same. So we're probably going counter to some of those trajectories. It's still pretty close, so little wiggle room there. The percent of special education students has been steadily increasing since 2017. In 2016, we did have a very low percentage of 6.6% of students identified as special education. We are now up to 11.4% in 2023. During that same time, the county and aspiring districts stayed fairly stable, so we just really decreased and came back up is what we're seeing. A lot of that was from after in COVID, we are seeing a lot more numbers of speech and other health impairment individuals. So hopefully those numbers might stabilize and come down a little bit in the next few years as we kind of come back to normal times.
Candace, can you remind me what aspiring that
Yes,
group
oh,
means?
yes. Yeah, aspiring districts are the districts in 2022, so we'll reevaluate every 5 years, but they are the top 15, 16 including Pewaukee, schools on the state report cards. That's a great question.
And Candace, those are top 16 that also match our demographics
K-12
and stuff, so who
demographics. I'm sorry.
identify as suburban, and match our demographics, so you will see a couple in there that aren't like in our region.
Yes, yeah, Altoona, very weird one. Sorry, I digress. Before we move on to the student achievement data, are there any questions about our enrollment information? Awesome. Okay. So we'll move on to the really bulk of the presentation, the student achievement data. As we're going through, I just wanted to make a couple of notes. When we look at the proficiency of students, we do take out the non-tested students. So if you go onto the public dashboards on WISE, the percentages will include the non-tested as their own category. We take them out so that we have a really clear picture of how advanced and proficient students compare across. For the most part this year, it was not as big of a deal, but some years we do see districts where maybe 25 to 30% of their students did not test. That really skews it when we're trying to compare a direct analysis of saying like, well, how many of their students were actually proficient on the exam and what is a direct comparison. With that, we also, when we're talking about proficiency, we'll be talking about proficiency on college and career readiness standards. All right, so let's get into it. These are the top 25% on the Wisconsin Forward School programs that take Wisconsin forward. As you can see, we are in the top 10%, landing at the 6th percent for math. Specifically, math is taken in grades 3 through 8.
So just a comment that I want to make on these. These are new slides that we haven't had in before because I wanted to try to provide some context for where does the state of Wisconsin sit in the landscape of public education in the country, and then where does Pewaukee specifically sit within the Wisconsin landscape. And so if we look at the NAEP results, which is really the only exam that is given across all states as a sample, In math, the state of Wisconsin ranks 5th out of the 50 states on the last NAEP results that were provided to us. Now, that is not the Wisconsin Forward exam. Each state gives its own exam, right, and stuff, but so, you know, the state of Wisconsin is 5th out of 50 states in math. And then when we look specifically inside of Wisconsin in math, we're in the top 6% of districts. So as we go through, you're gonna see rankings that we always do as Candace mentioned, to our aspiring districts as well as county districts, right? So you'll see us all over the board a little bit, depending on the grade level, as you may have seen if you previewed the presentation ahead of time and stuff. So just kind of important to remember that, you know, those rankings are comparing us to schools that are in really that top 5 to 10% by and large, certainly within the top 25% of the schools within Wisconsin. So I just wanted to provide that kind of framework so that we sort of understood where we sit in the landscape.
In English language arts, we can see kind of the same outline here, but Pewaukee actually falls in the top 5% on English language arts. So we squeaked in right at the 5th percentile, so really coming in at one of the top school programs that take the forward exam in the state.
Yeah, and on the NAEP in English language arts, the state of Wisconsin sits 15th among the 50 states.
So when we move into the details of each of the grades on the forward math, we can see that grade 3 remains stable from 22 to 2023, coming down slightly from that 2021 exam. And then grade 4 squeaking up slightly. We can see a little bit of an outlier sitting there from 2021, which is really good news as we move into grade 5. So grade 5 dipped down just slightly, but we see that grade from 2021 and grade 4 still up in that purple and coming in really high on grade 6. So we can see some really, really positive things happening in grades 5 and 6 with students maintaining their proficiency and then outperforming prior proficiency. So really moving the bar up from where it was in past years and coming up higher. We are looking for grade 6 since that grade 5 was able to maintain that high proficiency above around 75%. We are looking for the same thing to happen in grade 6. We just aren't 100% sure that that will happen given that this is the first time it happened for the 75.3%. So it is tentative that it would remain the same, but looking at past trends, we're on the more hopeful side that it will happen again in grade 6 next year.
So both Jane and Stacy had questions for me earlier today, just asking really kind of the same question is do we have this kind of data by cohort and by class? And we do, and I could certainly, we can run that report and provide that to the board. I mentioned to both of them, it's sort of a nature of like when you start to get to 70 to 80 slides for this presentation, you'd have to try to determine which ones do we want to bring forward. And one of the things that's helpful for us to look at when we look at by grade is it helps show us where some of our curricular impacts are working and where they're not working. So for example, grade 8 has been an area of focus for us for the last 2 years. As you can see, that had dipped down substantially. And that has been a big focus for us from both a curriculum and instructional standpoint. So seeing that rise back up this year and really have that cohort perform in a similar range to where they've typically performed versus this fairly large dip that the cohorts prior to them had experienced. That's telling us that our focus, right, at least this one data point, is going in the right direction. Conversely, when we see those dips and things sustain in those downward trends, it tells us that's an area from a curriculum standpoint that we want to focus. So that's why we look at it from a grade standpoint. But we do have it by class or cohort and could share that if anyone was interested.
So then grade 7, yep, staying about the same, just dipping down slightly, and then grade 8 coming in at 56.5%, which is the second year they've had a bit of an increase there. We wanted to provide a little bit of context for some of the growth since 2017-18 for different school districts around us. So these are the high achieving districts within the county, including New Berlin. So we wanted New Berlin in there.
They don't,
since
they
it
don't
is-
sit in our aspiring districts.
Yes.
Ironically, New Berlin is considered rural by the state. Because they.
rural?
Rural, yeah, because they have that pocket really far in their southern corner, so they're not actually in our aspiring districts data usually and stuff, but we did include them in this case because they are really so commonly close to us.
So when we look at this, we can see some districts saying somewhat similar. So Kettle Moraine had a tiny dip of 1% across that time frame. Elmbrook, 0.7%. Like really not a lot of movement for them, staying about the same. Decreasing districts included Menominee Falls at negative 2.4%, New Berlin, Sussex Hamilton, and then the state. And then Muskego, Norway, Oconomowoc, and us were all increasing. We sat right in the middle of those two. Muskego, Norway was increasing by about 2.5%, Oconomowoc 6.8, and we came in at 6.1 of an increase over that same time frame. So really in math, making strides towards more students across grades 3 through 8 as proficient.
Just a quick question, Danielle. What year did we adopt the Bridges curriculum?
Yeah, the 2020-2021 school year. Yeah, and just a note as well, like on all of these slides, just kind of always remember the 1920 school year is missing. It's really easy to forget that there is a missing year there because of, with the exception of the ACT, is the only one we have that for.
So diving into English language arts, kind of looking across that same time frame from 2018 to 2023. Taking a peek at grade 3, we see a slight dip for English language arts from 60.4 to 55.7. But then we see grade 4 jumping up there to 66.3 from 55.5 the prior year. And then really, really positive news in grade 5. Similar to what we kind of just discussed in grade 6, where one high percentage could be indicative of a trend, but we don't want to necessarily say that yet. We really see grade 5 coming up to be above that 70% proficient. And so we do believe that this will continue, and that could be an expectation around that 70% proficient, kind of going away from that 50% proficient of those prior years. For grade 6, we also see an increase up to 72.7%. And then grade 7 decided to do about the same. They had a tiny decrease from last year, but they're about the same as 2021, so really hovering right around that 60% proficiency mark. And then grade 8, also really positive for the second year in a row. They popped up a bit, going from 42.9% 2 years ago to 70.6% proficient this year. Then looking at that same chart, again, just kind of monitoring that progress of districts across time for English language arts. We see Menominee Falls, New Berlin, and the state decreasing, with Menominee Falls decreasing by about 4.8% and New Berlin about 4.3%. And then increasing districts are much more common for the English language arts at this point. Elmbrook, Kettle Moraine, Muskego, Norway, Oconomowoc, Sussex Hamilton, and us. And we went up by 3.5% across that time frame.
And we
So
started a
things
new
keep
curriculum
drifting up.
in this past school year, the 22-23 school year.
What was it called?
It was really just a revision of our existing. Yeah, we didn't get any new resources.
Candace, would you mind going back a slide, please?
Yes.
Do you have a theory on what was happening in grade 4? Like it's kind of back and forth, and so 58.2 to 55.5 up to 66.3.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at something slightly, I was over a column. So for the last 4 years, I really do think those are probably kind of similar, with that last one being on the low side of similar. I believe they did curricular work in grade 4 for English language arts this year, and that's what we think is the driver for this year, which is why we're hoping it will stay the same, that we're not going to kind of go back down to those very similar hovering around that 55-ish% proficient, and then we're going to stay up among the 66.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Moving into science, so the science forward exam is only given in grades 4 and 8. And we can see over the last 3 years, which is where I'm going to focus at a little bit, in 2017-18 and 2018-19, they did have slightly different standards. They adopted different standards for the exam. And so while it's nice to see them and good to see that history there, and with rankings, it's not quite as critical about the changes, it is important to know that they may not be directly comparable. And DPI does. And then slightly decreasing in grade 4 on the science proficiency. This is kind of the second year in a row. 21 and 22 could be considered more similar, but then it's starting to stair drop into a slightly decreasing trend in grade 4. Fortunately, we have the opposite problem in grade 8. We kind of see the last 2 years, they were hovering around the same. It was a slight increase, but really similar. But then this last year coming in at 72.4%, so a bit higher there. So starting to develop that more stair-stepping trend up.
And we have a revised curriculum that started this year, if you recall. That was approved last spring. So don't know those results yet.
And then we can again see the change across time. Looking from the 2021, Pewaukee came in about 2% higher overall when we look at grades 4 and 8 combined. Social studies, similar to science, they also had slight changes in social studies in 2021. And so we just want to make sure that while they're great for some comparison, that they're not a direct comparison. So we do see in the last 2 years, grade 4 stepping up a little bit from 76.5% to 83.4%. Grade 8 having a similar step up. And then grade 10 engaging in an interesting trend in which last year was a bit of an outlier for them and coming down to really similar trends of the year before and then very similar to the trends prior to the change. So for them, that change may not have really an impact at all. And 2022 is doing something fun.
And new science, or social studies was updated for curriculum started and implemented in the 21-22 school year. So 2 years worth of data there. So yeah, with the
Perfect
exception of 10th grade where we saw one up and one down, the new curriculum in 4 and 8 seems to be trending positively thus far.
Aries?
I think it's probably more of an outlier with that cohort in 21-22. You're going to see their ACT results shortly, which they performed nicely for us as well. So kind of in that last year plus, they sort of really started to perform on assessments stronger than they kind of previously had for us. So.
And then in looking at the longitudinal trends, we can see a lot of districts really moving up with that change in the exam coming in at 21, 22, a bit higher. We can kind of see the straight up lines there. And then staying relatively stable across that time frame. They did have a slight decrease in Menominee Falls, but not large enough for me to say without knowing their curriculum whether it would be something to stay or not. So we're going to move into the rankings for each of the grade levels. So we'll look at grade 3. These are the county school districts within the English language arts ranking. We see that the grade 3 did decrease a bit in their rankings, coming in much more similar to the 2019 rankings and not similar to the other years. So very much decreasing in their county English language arts rankings. And then when we look at the high achieving English rankings for grade 3, we also see a similar story. We see a little less stability in the last 2 years than what we saw among county districts, but among high achieving districts, we see that little stair step down right into the rankings, about 5th place from the bottom there among high achieving school districts. So these are the top 15 school districts in the state, and Pewaukee's coming in right there towards the bottom of those. Oh, there we go, did it twice. When we look at math, the grade 3 also had a similar experience in math. What is interesting to note is that this only went down by 1.1 percentage points, but it had a much more dramatic impact on the rankings this year. So it will be something to look to in coming years is if the county rankings among math are just going to be much higher in general, and that it will make it a little bit more competitive in those rankings.
I would note that in math in particular, Robin and I attend regional CNI meetings monthly, and I would say the vast majority of districts in our area have recently, within the last couple of years, 3 to 4 years, adopted Bridges resource as well, which is just like us. So we do see this like general, like the tide is rising in our area around math, which is great for all kids. But as Candace indicated, that's gonna make it all that more competitive. I'll also note that in both grades 3 and 4, I mean, across our system, right, we've had this data internally since July, and stuff, and so but in grades like 3 and 4 in particular, we've already started putting in place things that we want to make sure that we're keen in on. So you heard Lindsay and Pete and their team present about win time a couple of weeks ago, right? And those are, right, going to be directly related to the students that we're identifying that maybe aren't seeing the proficiencies on this amongst all of our other assessment strategies, right? This is one data point, but an important one for us to consider. And so just so you know, some of those strategies you're already hearing, that's stuff that's in response to some of this data that we get to see. We just can't talk about it until now, but we get to see it a lot sooner.
And so looking at the high achieving rankings for grade 3 in math, we also see a very similar to the county, where that 1.1% decrease in proficiency ended up being a bit more of a drop than potentially it would have been other years. Grade 4. Looking at grade 4 was able to come up on the higher end of normal for their ranking, so that was really good news. We can see that in the past, that same kind of comparable would have been a bit lower, so our past same ranking at 58.2 2 years ago percentage points resulted in the same ranking at 66.3. So some potential change among the county districts for English language arts as well, but good news for grade 4 to come back up from that decreasing trend. And move up a bit. Little bit of the same story for grade 4 among the high achieving districts as well. Coming back up from that dip last year, but they're really staying within the realm of normal. Once we move into next year in 2017-18 came off, they would really be mid-range and kind of lose the third from the bottom ranking there in 2017-18 as that holder, but very typical for them. The county math rankings for grade 4, very typical. They had a slight dip, but as we can see, very typical with the exception of 2021, where we talked about that being a bit of an outlier in that data, and as we saw that grade going forward in grades 5 and 6, they had higher performance as well relative to these grade 4 two classes. And then while it was a slight dip in the county, that same resulted in a slight increase compared to high achieving districts in math for grade 4. So a little interesting on how the high achieving resulted in a slight increase, whereas the county was just kind of like a dull there. But yeah. All right, grade 5. Grade 5 has been having a great time the last 2 years. Both years really popped up from those lower rankings toward the bottom, and those lower rankings were fairly consistent to what looks like a fairly consistent trend of higher rankings in English language arts for grade 5. So great news among that. Yay. Same thing among high achieving districts for grade 5, really popping up from those lower rankings before and coming up to the top of those school districts. The county math for grade 5, while the percent proficiency is very positive and similar to English language arts, that doesn't result in the same rankings for math. So we can see that 74.5% of students were proficient, and that still was a bit lower than last year in our rankings. And then also we would have come in at about the same place with 74.5% proficient, where we had 78.2% last year. So it looks like for math in grades 5, similar to how we talked about in grade 3, that it's going to take a little bit higher proficiency than the high proficiency students are getting to really maintain or increase the rankings. And then high achieving as well, coming down slightly from last year with that 74.5% proficient. And similar, it's probably going to start taking a bit more proficiency to really increase those rankings for grade 5. But doing very well with 74.5% proficient. All right. So we're going to take a minor detour to STAR growth just before we talk about the elementary schools, and we will come back to forward with grades 6, 7, and 8. The minor detour is just so that before we kind of summarize up the elementary schools, we can talk about PLE a little bit. PLE doesn't give forward, so they don't have any forward rankings or data to talk about. So we're just going to talk about their STAR growth a little bit. STAR is one of our district assessments, so we have our standardized assessments for most of the state assessments. We have district selected assessments and then classroom assessments. STAR is a district selected assessment at this time. This is the students' expected growth. So every year, students are assigned their expected growth at the beginning of the year with their first STAR test, and then we monitor them throughout the year. Usually it's a mid-year test at least once. Some grade levels take it a few times a year. And then if students are in intervention, they will take it more frequently. But we monitor them to ensure they are meeting that growth that's expected throughout the year. Each student's growth is individualized to them, and it's predicated on the scores that they have already tested with. So the percent of students meeting their expected growth ranged from 54% in grade 7 to 71% in grade 5. Other grades were largely in the 60s range, so coming in really above what would be expected at 50% would be the national average. When we look at reading expected growth, students in 4K through 8th grade take STAR, and we see that 4K and 4K and 2nd grade came in at 74%, with 5K coming in at 72% of students meeting their expected growth. This did range down to 45% of students in grade 7 meeting their projected growth in STAR reading.
Candace, the 4K kids that have experienced our new classrooms, like the first class is how old now?
They're currently in second
Second
grade,
grade,
so this day
okay.
they would be our first graders, would have been the first cohort.
Oh, I'm sorry, so I'm looking at I'm looking at first grade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I kind of mentioned a little bit of this already, but given the fact that we get, this data amongst all of our internal data like STAR and our classroom assessments, we've already put action plans in place. We do a deep dive of all of this work in the summer with our district teams. And so you've heard about learning sprints being established before. So those are goals based on triangulated data between STAR, between forward if it's appropriate in that grade, around any other formative assessment data we have in literacy or math for students. So we have those in place and continue to monitor those. You know that we implemented a new English language arts curriculum last year, but we're continuing to review that curriculum. There is the new literacy law, Act 20, and so we do have a team that is looking at the law and all of its elements and determining how that fits with our existing curriculum and what that might mean for us. So we are reviewing that currently. We have professional development based on these results that happened already this summer and will be ongoing. So for example, on each of our professional development days, teachers have identified a pathway that they want to learn more in and dive deeper into with data. So we have a pathway on literacy, we have a pathway on meeting student needs, and that's really around that differentiation, especially for our students with special needs, but not exclusively, really any students that have needs that we need to help. A pathway around engaging students in more authentic assessments. There's 7 different pathways total, and I would be happy to share more about those pathways. If I haven't already, I don't know if I included that in a DA report yet, but I will do that. and stuff. So we've also increased communication of student progress on proficiencies. So last year, we started sending proficiency scales home consistently at the elementary schools, and that's a piece of fidelity that we're continuing to increase as we go to this school year, so that parents really can be our partners, even more so in a more timely manner in their child's education. And then we continue to do intervention trainings to have a really vast warehouse of strategies that we don't have just one type of intervention or even two types. We have a giant spreadsheet of all the different types of interventions we can provide in math and reading, particularly to best meet the needs of individual students and stuff. So those are some of our action plans and stuff.
I could jump in with a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you use the word tutoring instead of intervention?
Honestly, it's just a language piece in our world that we've just kind of picked up over the years. I don't know. It's not a one or the other. I mean, it is. I mean, I guess intervention is conducted by a staff member that has a training in a specific strategy that they use, whereas tutoring may or may not be with a staff member and may or may not involve a specific strategy.
That's a new thing. Interventions used to refer to stepping between you and a person's intention to do suicide, something along, or drug interventions. That word has always had a much more aggressive side to it. And I only ask the question because in the 6 months or so that I've paid attention to what the language is here, nowhere do you talk about tutoring. You are always, the school is always going with that hyped language of intervention. And you use the same language, intervention, when you are talking about problematic issues that are not related to academics. So you will use that when you're talking about disciplinary things. You will talk about intervention. So I was surprised to see that same word being used for this two very different operations.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Sorry. One thing just for history, response to intervention is really the model that's been used broadly. So that term intervention speaks to really specific strategies that are provided through typically a certified reading specialist or someone of that nature. Tutoring tends to connotate, that might be a student tutoring another student, helping them with their assignments, that kind of thing. It's language that really comes from, that term intervention means academic intervention. But I believe the use of that word to your question, Mary, probably became the common language when response to intervention came in, and that's been 15 years probably since that's been in place. In terms of that model, we just recently transitioned from response to intervention to MTSS. We talked about the multi-systems of support. So one thing we do in education, Mary, is we always change words and language and acronyms, so that does happen a lot.
I will say we had a discussion on there's some similar verbiage in my elementary folks. If I look at you, I can't remember what the word was, but basically it was like, it was a pretty negative connotation for like what would be a red flag for a student, right? And stuff, and instead of using, Lindsay or Brian, do you recall what the word? Triggers, yeah. So the language in the model is triggers, like, and stuff, which we felt was also like a negative connotation. So we've changed our internal language to saying support indicators. When a student has an indicator of needing support and stuff, like, to your point, Mary, I would agree with you that it can be a much more negative connotation, with terminology.
Thank you.
Moving into grade 6 rankings, looking at the county English language arts rankings, they did come in at 72.7% and moved up in their rankings. So slightly higher than would be typical, as we see them bouncing back and forth every other year. Almost every other year because COVID's not in there, but every other line is good enough. Bouncing back and up, they finally broke that cycle and came up a bit in the county for English language arts. Among high-achieving districts, it's not quite as straightforward. They really did come up higher than last year. However, it's really similar to the years prior. excluding 2022, in which they came back up, but they're really similar. So I would not say they're out of the realm of normal possibility in high-achieving districts. Looking at math county districts, they also came up at 75.3% proficient to be in the top 5 districts among the county, and kind of breaking, again, similar to county English language arts trends, they broke their past performance to come up a bit.
So one thing I'll note on grade 6, and it's not to take away from what's happening in grade 6, but again, this has been a cohort we have seen be very high performing. So this was absolutely expected. It's absolutely expected that 7th grade is going to have pretty good performance this coming year. They have trended that way. So what was really encouraging with what we saw in grade 5 is that that cohort was able to maintain that level of performance, which they had not had that as well. So while we're certainly pleased with where grade 6 is at, what will be interesting to see is, again, now can we start a trend line where we're maintaining that level, and this isn't just a cohort that we know has been particularly strong across the way.
Yes, that's the hope. We can do it. For grade 6 among high achieving math, they also increased their rankings for high achieving districts. Grade 7. Grade 7 for the county English language arts rankings had their 4th kind of decreasing year in a row there. It is a little interesting looking at the percentages to see, well, are we looking at higher performing groups? It does look like there's the potential for the trend of higher performance in general among the counties, but we would like to see that ranking go back up most certainly, and the achievement go back up in grade 7. Among high achieving districts, really maintaining their rankings, but staying on the lower side of that. So we'd like to see it go up 2 instead of the down 1 from normal of the past 2 years, coming down with an average of 2018-19 ranking there. So really looking to edge up a little bit next year, and they should be able to. County math for grade 7 came down a bit with 60.2% proficient. They only came down about 1.2 proficiency points, but it really had a dramatic result for them this year in their rankings, dropping those 4. So hopefully looking to reverse that trend next year. With that 2017-18 cohort kind of hanging out down there, they're not necessarily outside of the realm of normal, but certainly on the lower side of normal for grade 7. Among high achieving districts, it is a slightly different story. They were able to maintain the higher ranking from last year. So we have a little bit of a discrepancy between how those higher performing districts are doing and the county districts are doing. So becoming a little bit more competitive among the county in math, and staying approximately the same in high achieving.
Yeah, I'll say that grade 7 is, of all the grades that we kind of look at across the board here, grade 7 is an area of focus for us this year, making sure that we have good alignment across all of our classrooms with the curriculum, and making sure that the rigor is there. That's an area that we think we can improve upon. And the staff have identified that as an area that we want to improve upon. And so I'm not saying anything that they haven't first identified themselves. But just note that for us, grade 7 is an area that we want to, see some trend lines change. And so that's an area of focus for us curricularly and instruction.
Moving into grade 8, we're first going to look at the comparison for pre-ACT and forward for grade 8. We did this last year just because some of the discrepancies are fairly large, particularly in math. Grade 8 takes pre-ACT in the spring. They take it about 3, maybe 4 weeks, depending on when the student, if they miss a day of school, they might take it a little bit later, but about 3 weeks after they take the forward exam. And as we can see, the English and reading component of the pre-ACT students were more proficient on that than they were on the ELA forward. Much better and closer than prior years, so that was very encouraging to see that change on the ELA. When we move to math, we can still see that kind of gap existing, in which students on the pre-ACT had 76.5% of students proficient, but on the forward exam, it was 56.5% of students proficient. So seeing a little bit of discrepancy just between those 2 exams. and really bringing in the importance of making sure we're looking at all of the exams and information for students as we're looking at their district assessments, state assessments, and classroom assessments, and how their performance is doing.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that this, I think, is every year our best example that shows the importance of taking multiple data points into consideration. As Candace mentioned, this is about a 3-week difference. We didn't do some magical silver bullet that all of a sudden got 20% more students proficient in math in a matter of 3 weeks. If we did, we would all, like, I don't know, be on the national talking circuit, I think, and stuff. So I just think this is a really good indication as to why we need to consider multiple data points, because depending on the assessment, you can get different results.
Do you know which test do they take first, the pre-ACT versus
They take forward
the
first.
forward first?
Looking at the rankings for grade 8 with the county English language arts, we can see that the improvement to the 70.6% of students proficient also improved their rankings. Relative to last year, that large of a jump in proficiency didn't result in quite that large of a jump in rankings. If we look at last year, we would have been second, but this year coming in a bit lower, so just keeping in mind that we may be looking at some changes among those county districts in English language arts that we've mentioned in a couple of grade levels, that it seems like there might be some changes in proficiency coming. When we look among the high achieving districts, coming in third place with the same 70.6% of students proficient, so really coming up among high achieving districts. When we look at math, we see a little bit of a difference. While the students did increase their proficiency by about 14%, they really retain the same ranking. So really starting to look at that there is an impact going on the county having a bit of a higher achievement going on. We would have only been, I think, 1 place higher, 2 places, 3 places higher if we look at last year's. So probably not a dramatic difference, but still we see some trends in the county that might make it more difficult to move those rankings. Among high achieving districts coming in comparable to 3 and 4 years ago, 2019 and 2018, and really changing that direction of the last 2 years among the high achieving districts. So some really positive changes amongst those. Moving to grade 9, this was the first year that grade 9 and 10 took pre-ACT Secure. So in 2022, that was the last year they took pre-ACT Aspire. So just moving over into the pre-ACT Secure. And they had 67.6% of students proficient in English language arts and 63% of students proficient in math on pre-ACT Secure.
So again, that's why we don't have that comparable data, because it is now a different assessment, and so we can't compare.
Can you speak to the change? What is the change about?
Yeah.
So ACT stopped giving ACT Aspire, so DPI was forced into making the change. Both exams are given on a computer, so that at least was minimizing one of the changes. Pre-ACT Aspire did exist on a scale from 400 to 450, whereas Pre-ACT Secure moves back to that standard ACT kind of scale we're all used to, which is very helpful. I appreciated that. And then they are supposed to be very similar in content being given, but there are some opportunities in which they could be slightly different. Moving into grade 10, we see 63.8% of students in English language arts were proficient and 58.1% on math. So while slightly lower than grade 9, since that's our really only comparable for internally, at least at this point, doing still fairly well at above that 55% proficiency on all of it. And coming to the ACT, which was very successful this year relative to the 2022 school year. All of the scores, English, reading, math, science, which also led then to the composite score, improved over that 2022 score. We had some declining trends, and the high school really put a lot of work and emphasis into reversing that trend, and it really paid off this year. And it resulted in a higher score for them, coming back up to in some cases 2021 levels, and in some cases exceeding those 2021 levels. And we can see that that result also had an impact on our rankings. So on the composite score amongst county districts, we came back up from that decrease, and we can see that now a little outlier dip there. We're going to keep these ones up, coming right back up to normal amongst the county districts. When we look at high achieving districts, we also popped right back up to our relatively normal place. We can see we held that place for 3 of the past 5 years. So very exciting news coming back up and reversing that change. When we look at our English scores among county districts, we did have the top score tied with Elmbrook there, but top, so we came in, squeaked in, which was very, very exciting relative to that 2022 decrease we had experienced. When we look at our high achieving school districts, we also see us coming back up from last year, coming right back into our really normal place there. Hopefully we can stay in there and not kind of go up and down between those two that we've been holding, but still really positive change from last year. For the reading scores, coming back up from 2022 to being in the 2nd place in the county, just right in line with our average scores for prior years amongst the rankings. Among high achieving districts, we were able to exceed our prior rankings, so not only kind of popping back up from 2022, but really exceeding them. Hopefully, we would be able to maintain this and kind of create a new normal higher ranking. Right now, this might be on the higher side of normal. When we look at our math county score rankings, coming back up, this one did not decrease quite as much as we saw in English and reading, but coming back up from 2022 and coming in on that higher side of normal for the past 4 years. Similar for our math scores in high achieving school districts, coming back up and retaining kind of a more normal ranking there. Science, same thing, just very good news for the ACT. Really coming back up, that's the story from 2022. Hopefully we have a little space for science to grow. We would have liked to seen one more spot, but really coming back up from 2022, which is really critical. Among high achieving districts, we came back up and then outperformed the 2019 and 2020 rankings, slightly below the 2021 rankings.
So just the piece on the ACT that I would highlight is that, you know, the high school did a tremendous amount of work around really the culture of, you know, the significance of what the ACT can provide to students. The vast majority of universities continue to remain test optional. And, you know, most of them are extending into the next few years or sort of have just left it open-ended. So while we knew that that was a driving factor for students to take the ACT seriously for many years, that has not been the case now since COVID. But the high school did a nice job of helping students understand that ACT is still very much tied to scholarships and to other factors that can help them as they progress throughout their future and stuff. And so I think there were a lot of wins of what the high school did, and they're continuing to translate that into the work that they do this year.
Are students able to take the ACT but not provide the score in their admission application?
For the vast majority of universities, yeah. So like all of our students have to take it because it's our state exam, but they don't have to send it and stuff. So the UW currently says that the class of 2025, our current juniors, will have to submit again. Thus far, they're the only university I've looked into. Now, mind you, I have not done a thorough analysis, but I have been looking at it fairly significantly since I have a junior in my house as to which ones are and are not test optional.
And when you say UW, you mean just Madison, not the whole
Right,
system?
Madison, yes,
Okay.
not the whole system, Madison, currently.
So just taking a quick peek at the advanced placement exams, we did come down slightly from our high of 79.9% in the last 10 years of the pass rate to 72.8%. So still a fairly high pass rate above 70%, staying within a relatively normal range of the last 5 years and above the 2021 pass rate there at 65.7%. The credits earned in credit-bearing programs over the last 3 years has slightly stabilized. Students did earn 1,206.4 higher education credits this year, but stabilizing after coming up from really jumping up those past 5 years.
Just one commentary on that. I only say it because there was a Journal Sentinel article recently around career pathways and credit-bearing options and stuff, and it indicated for whatever reason that we don't have any career pathways and stuff that are accepted. That is not true. We have 5. Mike and I talked about that, so that was an error in the Journal Sentinel's reporting. And so I just want to make sure that that gets mentioned because that was put out publicly, and that's absolutely false. And these
As long as we're on
credits
these
sort
two
of indicate
slides,
that.
Could you also comment just a little bit about the AP versus the
Yeah,
credits?
so we've kind of stabilized for the last really 5-6 years. We've continued to evaluate which courses make the most sense to be kept as AP classes and which ones might make sense to offer as a dual credit class, dual enrollment class with a higher ed institution. We primarily use UW Green Bay. And so we have really kind of analyzed all of those to determine which one basically is going to transfer best for students, and have made that adjustment. So some of that credit-bearing program increase is due to us actually reducing AP courses because we're changing them over to that. So we have that courses that once used to be AP but are now credit-bearing through UW Green Bay and therefore transfer include U.S. history, psychology, economics. We have 2 English classes, Spanish, French. We did have chemistry, but the teacher retired, so we've had to go back to AP chemistry. But yeah, so we've switched over. So we kind of have a mixed bag now.
Right, but it's a more of a solid strategy to get the credits that are there.
Right.
Plus, they don't have to take the AP exams, so
Right.
that's part of it. And
Right,
if it's
yeah,
a universal UW Green Bay, it transfers to any other
correct.
UW school, so.
Correct, not only that, but because it's a UW system school, it really translates to everything short of perhaps a private school. I think Yale is the only one that we've seen anything not accepted from yet right now, but a lot of private schools have a business model attached to which credits they accept or don't accept. And it's not dependent on how you test on one given day. You have to have a B or better in the course. And so, yeah, it's worked out much better, and the cost is about 1/3 of what the exact same course would cost if they went and took it at a university. So while it's a little bit more expensive than the AP exam, the credits are more guaranteed, and students have the duration of the year to prove their proficiency and not just, hopefully, they're feeling good on that one day.
As a parent of a student attending a private university out of state, all of those GB credits were accepted.
So,
Yeah.
like for Emily, they were accepted sometimes just as gen ed though, like they weren't,
Yeah.
they weren't always accepted for the particular course. But she went in as a sophomore because of those credits.
The higher education credits.
Mostly. She had some AP, maybe 2 AP tests.
And then just looking at the secondary action plans.
Yeah, so it's somewhat similar to the elementary in that we have learning sprints that now happen system-wide for us. We have professional development, like I mentioned, that has already been going on and continues to go on. The high school in particular has been really focused on increased communication of student progress, really having the students send home progress to their parents basically every other week in their courses. And so really having them own a lot more of that communication, and so that's been going on this year as well. And then taking what we learned really from our focus in the ACT last year and translating that down now to the pre-ACT as well, and having teachers transfer some of those learning sprint strategies that way.
And then the 23-24 assessment calendar, students will be taking STAR as their screener in 4K through 8. That will be done at least 3 times. Grade level dependent, a couple grade levels have more than the 3 times in there. COGAT, the talented and gifted screener in grades 3 and 5. Pre-ACT in the fall will be given in grades 9 and 10, and they just shipped those out, so I should be seeing those in 2 weeks. Access for ELLs is winter. Wisconsin Forward Exam and Dynamic Learning Maps are both in the spring. Grades 3 through 8 and 10 for Forward and grades 3 through 11 on DLM. The state ACT grade 11 and then pre-ACT secure in the spring will be grades 9 and 10, and then pre-ACT for grade 8 is also in the spring. And then if anyone has any questions.
Ready to take any questions? It's a lot.
It's a lot of slides to go through.
Very well done, Candace.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Candace. We appreciate all your work on it.
No
Danielle, thank you.
Thank you.
Admin, thank you for coming in tonight
Yeah.
and being available to
Yeah.
us.
Oh, you guys get to stay for just a little longer.
Oh, yeah, we got one more thing, don't we?
Just one more thing.
It's the Danielle show tonight.
Yeah, it is, sorry, and stuff, so. Yeah, so last time we heard from the other departments on their continuous improvements, and so just kind of piggybacking off that data report, I'm going to present the teaching and learning department overview as well. Usually we would do the schools with me as well, but right, we're trying to spread this out a little bit, so they'll be coming up next time. So there is some additional academic data that they'll be sharing, in particular PLE. Poor PLE doesn't have any standardized tests. The school report cards will be released November 14th. So next week, I'll be sending you an email with a memo on our on how we did on our state report cards. But poor PLE doesn't get a report card either. They get a little sad document that says that they're making satisfactory progress, because the only option is not satisfactory progress or satisfactory progress and stuff. So they will get a report indicating where they're at and stuff. So more will be shared in the next few weeks, really specific to PLE. But from a department continuous improvement report, I wanted to share that. Do we have the clicker somewhere?
While you're looking for the clicker, I will note that PLE was north of 70% on their growth targets and your STAR assessment in 3 of your 4 grades, which was really good to see.
Yes. So Mike shared last time, right, that our commitments are obviously to continue to help our students become future ready, as well as create a sustainable organization. And so that future ready component very much sits in the teaching and learning category, though we do have goals in both areas. So when we take a look at the teaching and learning goals in the strategic plan, these, again, we're entering year 3 of these 3-year goals. And so these are the results of year 2. So we're really looking at having a personalized professional development model that helps our teachers improve their instruction and assessment strategies to not only demonstrate academic rigor, which is obviously some of the pieces we heard about tonight, as well as those growth in the graduate profile competencies. And that's what the principals will spend some time on in a couple of weeks, really talking about how do we do in those graduate profile pieces beyond just the academic data. As well as then our future ready goal, which is to have a personalized learning model that helps our students improve their academic achievement while closing our gaps, in particular in literacy and math, as well as those growth and graduate profiles. So you can see that the two are very intertwined, right? The goal obviously is to have students be prepared for what will meet them as they exit our system. In order to do that, we need to make sure our teachers are well prepared to instruct them. And so those are the big major goals. And obviously you just heard a full report in particular on how we're doing on those academic pieces. So I want to talk really just about the operational performance of last year in particular. And so one focus area that I always have is around whichever curriculum renewal we have in place. So last year, you'll recall that you approved science. We also had library media, response to intervention, which switched to multi-tiered system of support. So you've all heard about those results over the last few months. Currently, we have art, world language, physical education, and health that have started the curriculum renewal process, and those are all ones that you will see coming up this coming spring. You heard last year about our alternative education program, specific at the high school. We had seen an increase in students needing different pathways after kind of the pandemic. And so we reimagined our alternative program and developed the Foresight program. That was a competency-based program. As you recall, we had to change some policy around that. And then you heard from some of our students in that program. And then we also work to develop what we call the Compass program that supports students in a hybrid online while also taking traditional classes in our school while adding in wellness support. And so that launched this fall. But that really got developed last year. And then our 4K program, we've been keeping an eye on as that continues to grow as well. It was in its third year of implementation last year. So some results of how things went. From a curriculum renewal process, you just got a long presentation about where we were at ELA. So this is just a repeat of some of the slides that you just previously saw. But again, overall, saw some good growth gains after year one in most grade levels, as well as the ACT. And then a couple of grade levels that we have some refinements that we need to continue to do. And again, Art, World, Language, Phi-Ed Health will be coming to you this spring. From an alt ed standpoint, again, that Foresight program was developed. We had our first 3 graduates out of that program in 2023, and I would say, I was talking to Mr. Bursai last week, and Mr. Sniff can probably attest to this, that those were 3 students that I don't know what their pathway would have been if we didn't have this program for them. And the level of engagement we saw with them in their learning was significantly different than what they had previously experienced. And so we only had very small numbers in the program intentionally so that we could continue to evolve the program. But really a success thus far. The Compass program, like I said, just started in fall of 2023. But we developed it last year so that it would be ready to go. And students, again, take traditional courses, they take some online courses, and then they every day start their day with small group instruction with the same cohort of students. That includes structured wellness support, which they call crew time, which is really a way to kind of kickstart their day as a cohort and be a support model for them so that they really have that culture and that group of people that they can help identify with, and also to get their minds in the best place to be successful for the day. And so far, things are going very well there. That is staffed by one of our special education teachers, because a number of students do have IEPs that are in that program, as well as one of our alternative education teachers.
What's the enrollment number in that? Do you know?
Brian, do you know the
Approximately?
enrollment number offhand of Compass? Yeah, that's what I was going, 19 comes to mind.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's-
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
That's good. Ballpark is good.
Yep. And then lastly, our 4K program is, so here are some academic results. On the left-hand side there is the math results. We did change again to bridges in 2021, so we changed how we assessed math in that same year. So that was also the year that 4K started. So I don't really have any pre-math data, but you can see that by and large, there's been very high, high percentage of proficiency for students and generally an uptick, with the exception of operations and algebraic thinking, but overall 90% or above, except for that one category this past year of proficiency. And again, good upticks in math. Literacy, we do have pre-change data. So you see the blue line is our old 4K model. So I put a black line there, so just so you can kind of mark it and stuff. So again, blue line is 4K model, the old 4K model, and then the other are the last 3 years. So again, great jumps in our literacy programming. We continue to see strong academic data, and second year in a row in which we had no literacy achievement gap between students with disabilities and students without disabilities as they exited and entered into 5K. So really, really pleased with the data that we're seeing academically, and of course the experience parents and students continue to rave about the program. So huge shout out to our staff, as well as Brian and Beth, and of course Robin, who is all things 4K for us, including building things.
Could you explain that so the no literacy achievement gap?
Right.
Can you expound on that a little bit? in terms of
Yeah.
What that means?
Right, so whenever we take a look at our achievement, we break it down by our demographic, different cohorts. And so one of those is always our students with special needs versus their regular peers. And really in all grade levels, and I would say across the vast majority of school districts that you're going to find is that students with special needs perform, have less proficiency than their regular peers. In the case of 4K, they performed either at the same level as their regular peers. Students with disabilities either performed at the same or in some cases exceeded their regular peers. That's not to say that there isn't any children, but as a cohort, right, there is no significant difference between those two demographic groups. So that's what I have from my department. As far as the other areas, you obviously heard a really long presentation on all the other things, so I wanted to keep this brief and just highlight a few things you didn't potentially hear, but I'm happy to take any questions.
As a parent of somebody in the Compass program, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating, the creativity and the dedication that the administrators and the team puts into these kids, it's just phenomenal. I mean, as you know, mine was a number in a school that paid no attention to him. And here, like, we think he could graduate,
Yeah,
which
and
is just,
yeah, and I'll say kudos to our alt ed teachers as well as our counselors here in particular who came to Brian and I and said, like, foresight is great, but it's not meeting all the needs yet. We feel like there's still this spot for a particular group of students, and they could really quickly say, here's sort of that profile of that student, and here's what we think those students need, and you know, it's great when you can just give them the go-ahead to, yes, go create something wonderful, and they do. And so huge shout out, especially to the teachers who are working in that program now, in what they've all been able to do, so.
And Stacy,
Question?
I
Go
have
ahead.
to say this as part of this. I mean, obviously, we have the 4K program and the results that we're seeing there, which is clearly the point when we really open up that door for the kids' future as they start. But then you said, I mean, the Foresight program, the Compass program, those things really help keep those doors open for those kids to be able to be successful in the Pewaukee School District. And that's really an applause to all of you in the administrative program who make those things happen on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we would not be as successful as we are if we didn't have the dedication and commitment of the leadership and the staff at all of the schools that we have here. So from 4K all the way to the high school level. So thank you all for your work that you do here, so.
Question, if I may. The Foresight and the Compass are not related to Woodland?
No.
What's the enrollment in Woodland?
Woodland isn't a program that we utilize that I'm aware of, so
Not familiar, I'm not
I'm
familiar with
not
that.
familiar with what that is.
What is Woodland, Mary? I'm not sure what that is.
I may be saying the name wrong. We're paying them money.
Oh, that's an off-placement site.
Oh, for special
placement.
education students, yeah.
Is that the wrong name?
It's a off-placement site for special education, not alternative education, so it's just, those are different, so that's Tony Strinke's role. John, did you just say we think we have 2 students in that? Yeah, 2 students in
Okay,
that
thank you.
program. Yeah.
all right, does anybody else have anything? Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, administrators.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, moving on to John. I'm going to read all that.
You know what John showed tonight.
I know, right?
All right, so tonight you're asked, the board is asked to approve first a tax and revenue anticipation line of credit. In the past, the district has borrowed funds each year. Because of our position in the equalization aid formula and the state funding formula, we're heavily reliant on property taxes, most of which aren't received until January. So we operate from the start of our fiscal year all the way till January. You heard from the Business Affairs Committee earlier tonight. At this point of the fiscal year, we have about 3.7% of our revenues received and are well over 20%, 24% of our expenditures have been incurred through the end of October, which leads us to that point of needing, first of all, an adequate cash reserve, fund balance that we carry to fund those operations. But for well over 20 years, needing to do a tax and revenue anticipation note, a cash flow borrowing to be able to meet our operational cost up until when the taxes come in January. This year will be the first year not issuing a long-term note of anywhere from 3 months to a year to cover those cash deficits, to issuing a line of credit, which is really a short-term borrowing that we would issue with a bank. So you have, the action tonight is based on an RFP, a request for proposals and bid that we had with multiple financial institutions, and they're looking to award this to Town Bank. It's a Wintrust Community Bank for the line of credit. The line of credit will be open from this point until November at the latest. Statutes say we can't go past November 1st of 2024 for the term on that TRAN or line of credit. They both fall under the same statutory authority.
Question, if I may? John, what's the difference between this one and the next one?
The next one is authorizing, so also under the statutes, you need to authorize the institution as a depository of public funds.
Thank you.
And that's to establish Town Bank.
Motion to, what do we need a motion here for the first one? Resolution?
Yeah, the one that's designated the public depository.
So item D on the
Item D,
agenda?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, motion to approve item D, would that suffice?
You want her to read it, or?
Yeah, if we can read
Could you
that
read it,
into
please,
the.
Mary?
I'll let you guys read it.
Okay, I'll read it. Okay. Any other, was that all?
Was there
John?
any more discussion or questions? Does anybody have anything?
Well, there's a motion on the table, if you would either second it or before you go on to discussion. So if you'd read it, Jane, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll read it. Yep.
Thank you.
Motion to approve a resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in an amount not to exceed $1,500,000 with Town Bank, Wintrust Community Bank.
Second.
All in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
The second action that you have on there then is to establish Town Bank as a depository for the district. We need
Call
to
the
take-
question. We're good to go?
We have a
Call,
motion.
call the question? Yeah, we need a, well,
We have to make a vote in terms of whether or not we're going to accept that, right? So
call the question means we want to take a motion and a vote. Yeah. I'll put a motion on the table to approve item E.
yes, you could do that. So
Jane, would you mind reading it again?
Thank you, Jane.
Is John done? Are you done?
We can discuss it after the motion. Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay. Motion, approve a resolution designating public depository and authorizing withdrawal of public monies with Town Bank, a Wintrust Community Bank.
Second.
All right, John, could you please describe what's going on?
So really, this gives us the authority to take those public monies and deposit them in the account, or to draw from the line of credit that has been established in the previous motion.
Any questions for John? All right, motion has been made and seconded. Do I have all in favor? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Just a quick comment. I want to acknowledge the good work that's been done on this. It wasn't long ago, we were borrowing up to $9 million a year in short-term borrowing to be able to bridge this time of the year when we're waiting on revenues to come in. So the work that's been, the work of the board and of John and his team over years and years of good stewardship has led to the ability to eliminate the vast majority of that short-term borrowing, go to a line of credit. So I think this is the first time ever, right, John, that we haven't had to go to a short-term borrow to be able to bridge this. So that's been a long long time effort of the district, and so I don't want that to just sail by without some acknowledgement, because there's been many years working to get to a point where you didn't have to short-term borrow.
Okay, moving on to the policy committee.
And I can jump,
You're gonna do it? Okay.
Brent asked me to jump in and do my best Brent impression here tonight for the policy committee. So we met prior, at our last evening together. And members of the committee, please jump in, or anybody if you would like. The first policy that was brought forward and discussed was 5308. If you look at 5308, you'll see red text that represents the recommendations of the committee. This goes back to last spring. We had a number of parents that brought forth issues and concerns related to experiences of students specific to racism and bigotry in our schools. So we've spent some time since then in several of the policy committee meetings looking at strengthening some language around this issue. So I'd really say 5308 and 5312 are linked in that regard. 5308, you see a specific section titled Racism and Bigotry, and the language that is recommended there. So before I move on to 5312, just see if there's any questions for myself or members of the committee.
It's crossed out and then it's highlighted, so what is the correct, what is the insert there?
Yeah, that's showing you the edits that happened. So the line through language was the first draft, and then at the last committee meeting, we eliminated those phrases, and the highlighted was the replacement phrase.
Okay.
Any questions on that one? All right, 5312 related to this. So again, in 5308 was specific to educational opportunity and non-discrimination. It made sense to put something in there. And then the core student code of conduct, we felt that it made sense to also reflect language. So you see a section titled Harassment, Racism, and Bigotry with some recommended language there in red text. Questions on that one? Clipping right along, we had 5700.08, interscholastic athletics and activities. This is a policy that was brought forward by Jeff Behrens. This is a new policy. Jeff's involved in a specific improvement process, and one of the things in this national continuous improvement process that he's working through recommends that districts maintain this type of a policy specific to interscholastic athletics and activities. So this was also reviewed by the committee. So any questions on that one?
Is this related, so we're required to adhere to all the WIAA rules to participate.
Correct.
So this doesn't change anything in regards to WIAA, right?
It does not.
Okay.
It provides some additional definition and some things, but, right, it doesn't change anything in that regard. Then you had multiple policies that were reviewed with little or no change. This includes 3100.09, income short and long-term borrowing, oddly enough, which is what we were just talking about. 5311, search of lockers. This is, again, something, Danielle, you reviewed with, I think, our associate principals, and there were no changes recommended there. Any questions? 3100.11, income resale supplies. Very short policy there, but no changes were recommended. Questions? Student parking. 3100.12 was reviewed, and there were no recommendations for change. 6900.04, district use of social media, no change.
That was a minor one. Minor.
Other minor verbiage, yeah. let's see, 5300.07, our weapons policy, which is largely statutory. There was one add to the end of paragraph about 2/3 of the way down on the page, just becoming more specific in terms of the length of an expulsion that would be required. The state of Wisconsin requires that a student bringing a firearm to school be expelled for a year minimally, and so that was just clarified to say from the date of the violation. Questions? And did I miss any?
I don't think so.
Okay. Hearing no questions, these will appear on the consent agenda at the next meeting.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, moving on to personnel. We still don't have any.
Yep, no personnel
Okay.
issues for tonight.
Then the upcoming activities, we have our next regular board meeting on Monday, November 20th. That's the night the continuous improvement reports by school will be done. We're asking you to hold Monday, December 4th right now for a learning session. December 11th, we will have our first December meeting to include Business Affairs and Policy Committee.
Oh, hold on. What's the, do we know what the topic is going to be on December 4th?
I was just pulling that up.
Natalie and Dylan, good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. I'm not sure which one that was slated for.
Because that's not the review of the board survey. That's in January?
That's at the end of January.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious.
Question on the December 11th. Could we move the policy meeting to December 4th? I think I heard you say that business and policy are on December 11th unless
We are because the 4th is, we're talking about holding a learning session.
Mm-hmm.
We typically don't have a committee meeting before, but I guess we could discuss.
Yeah, typically, historically, the board's only had committee meetings before a regular meeting, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. So that
Thoughts?
would be up to you. The learning session is tentatively scheduled to start at 6, so if you were to move the committee to that date, you would want to plan on that starting probably at 5.
How long is the learning session?
It kind of depends on the topic, an hour and a half to 2 hours.
So it sounds like a time frame wise, it's regular business. Why can't we could we do policy at 6, learning session at 7?
It's up to you.
But I think Bren's not here. Isn't it Bren? I mean, she's not here. Larry.
We could talk about it at the next meeting. on
And
the
Bren's
20th.
here as the chair.
Yeah.
I'll just note that I won't be here. I do have 2 policies that are coming up. Not to say we couldn't either move those off or I'm sure you could handle anything as well and stuff.
Okay.
I won't be here that night.
You won't be here on the 4th.
On the 4th, I won't be here.
Yeah, and that's good for us to, because let me double check on that too. The only other thing, Mary, for us to think about with that is sometimes we
Hold
kind
it.
of have these as placeholders and then we don't end up needing the learning session.
I
So,
don't think we have a topic, but I'm not 100% on that.
Yeah.
Julie will know for sure.
so
but-
with Julie not being here tonight, I think if you want to bring this back up at the next meeting, Brent will be here and we'll know for sure if we're having that learning session that night.
Okay. So then we have the Monday, December 11th, and then our next meeting after that will be Monday, January 15th, and right now it's scheduled for both committees and the regular board. Then, as you mentioned, the Monday, January 29th will be the learning session with the, help me out, the,
Board survey.
thank you, the board survey.
Board self-assessment, correct? yeah.
Board self-assessment, okay. And then I just wanted to mention in the DA report, it talked about the WASB conference, so please let Julie know if you're able to come and she will get you registered, or able to attend that, she will get you registered. Is there anything else?
I don't have anything.
Legislative advocacy?
Stacy, the board survey that we take, remind people that that's coming up.
Oh, to do it?
Yes.
Well, Julie will send that out.
Right, thank you, Jeannie. Yeah, so that, the meeting on January 29th is a report back on a board survey that we do. So we need to fill it out to have the report back. All right, legislative advocacy? Anything?
I don't have anything tonight, John, anything? No updates tonight?
So far, so
Nothing.
good.
Okay. And then Danielle or Ashley, are you going to the Human Growth and Development? We had someone that had to drop out.
Yeah, so we, Dr. Young, who's our medical advisor for the district, had to pull out of the committee due to other commitments that she had, and she wasn't going to be able to give it the time that it was needed, which we respect, but it's that we do need to then replace her. So just wanted to get the board's input on what process you would like us to follow. Ashley and I discussed this. So Dr. Young had been identified, us as, and our other healthcare member had been identified by us contacting our wellness or our healthcare partners that we have in the district. And so that's where we had previously in the process used. So we can either follow that process and contact the remaining healthcare people that we still have to see if they're available. The other thing Ashley and I discussed is that if, as a board, you would like to recommend any names or give me any guidance, if you want our curriculum team to provide any recommended names, we could do that as well, as long as I had those by the end of this week. We do have our next meeting coming up this Friday, so I don't know that that person would be able to be in place by then, but yeah, so just looking for some direction from the board as far as how you would like me to proceed with the replacement of this member.
Do you, sorry.
Just to be clear, so you're saying you have a list of names of people that you are part of your health?
Well, we have people who we partner with in the district, right? So like the different providers that come in and provide
Yes.
services. So we have them. We haven't, so
You
that
could tap
could.
that list.
the-
I mean,
Yeah,
somebody who's
we
familiar with
could
the
tap
district.
that list. That would be an option. That's what the process had said. We could also, again, if you wanted to give recommendations to me, I could take those and contact them.
I don't have anything either.
I think Larry knows a
That's fine.
surgeon. Larry knows a surgeon. You want to volunteer somebody?
No, I
I'm
think it's,
joking.
I mean, somebody who's familiar with the district's work. is
Okay.
important.
Can I just get like a backup direction in case we go down that whole list and everybody that we partner with is like, I can't make this commitment, then.
Are
well,
you looking for a doctor, or could it be a nurse, or?
It can be any, according to the law, it can be any healthcare provider, and according to our process, it can be any healthcare provider. It probably would make sense to have somebody who generally has some knowledge of, adolescents and, this topic. So whether that's a pediatrician or a general doctor, nurse.
Nurse practitioner.
Yeah, it's healthcare provider, so it doesn't have to be a doctor per se.
Nurse practitioner, PA.
Yeah, yeah,
DO.
yeah. So go down our healthcare provider plan, and then if all of them say no, what would you like me to do as a backup? If I get that far, or do we revisit it?
I mean, I have a neighbor, she's lovely, she's a pediatrician. She's got littles, they're not in the district yet.
And we can always, I can do that first, and then the next board meeting, we'll have another update anyways from this Friday's meeting. I don't think we'll probably end up having another meeting until after the holidays and stuff, so we have time that if this process doesn't work, we could revisit it on the 20th when we meet again and say, what would you like us to do now?
Yeah.
Ashley, any comments or thoughts?
No, I think that's fine.
I just thought of something, because Dr. Young, is not theoretically a parent in the district anymore. Does it matter if it is a parent because of the numbers?
It doesn't.
It doesn't,
No,
okay.
no, it doesn't.
I mean, the other one we have is Noah's dad, Noah Subject's dad.
Okay,
Well, he's a pediatrician, I think.
okay,
I mean, I have a
Pediatrician
couple
neighbor,
people
is
I
that-
can ask
is that
too.
real- for
Okay.
real?
okay,
Healthcare professionals.
Another, yeah.
okay, okay.
Go through the list and can't
Okay, if we
find-
go through the list and exhaust that, then
Yeah.
maybe, we can go that route.
Okay.
Be a resident of the district?
Doesn't have to be, no,
Oh, I
in
guess
order
I
to
thought
be.
it would be.
I think it'd be
Makes the little
nice if
bit
they
nicer.
were, right, yeah,
Right.
but
Yeah.
they don't have to be. Yeah. Okay, that works for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on that, both of you. I'm pretty sure we don't have any comments from citizens.
It's a good guess.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?